The first item this week, January 23rd, I believe, in Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, the Kremlin-appointed head, introduced a special regime at checkpoints to localize threats to the security of the population, as well as military and other facilities. This regime involves citizens crossing the border at 3 established road checkpoints and 2 railway checkpoints, with military convoys traveling along specially designated roads in cooperation with Russia's security services. Individuals at checkpoints are required to present identification documents, while military personnel and law enforcement must also present their papers. The occupiers are in a hurry to increase the pace of issuing passports before the so-called elections of the so-called president of the Russian Federation, which are scheduled for March. The so-called elections themselves, of course, are fiction, and due to the low pace of passport issuing, the Russians have allowed those with Ukrainian passports still to quote-unquote vote in the election. During the raids, occupiers prevent movement out of villages and hold talks with those who have not yet received documents, threatening Ukrainians with consequences if they don't comply. The National Center of Resistance in Ukraine urges those in the resistance movement to inform themselves about collaborators involved in the passportization process so that in the future they will not escape responsibility. So for more on this topic, we're going to now go over to Bionade to discuss passportization a little further. Bionade, over to you.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, like you said, Joseph, the Russians are trying to hand out this. And lately we saw an expansion of methods applied to this unlawful endeavor for the reason of the upcoming sham election in Russia. I will now tell you a bit about some methods which are, for example, financial incentives. There are different schemes where the Russian occupiers are offering free housing or small pensions to Ukrainians willing to take the Russian passports. Like you mentioned, these forced talks to persuade Ukrainians happens too in a series of raids which happened in the temporarily occupied territories. Whole villages and small areas of cities will be blocked by Russian armed forces, and Russian personnel supported by collaborators will enter and have forced talks about the Russian passports. Often Ukrainians resisting giving up their citizenship will be threatened with violence. Ukrainians will also be threatened with having their children separated from them and taken away. We remember Tigran and Nikita, the 2 teenagers, which, after getting tortured and taken away from their family, resisted the Russians in an armed standoff and were sadly killed by the Russian occupiers. Another method is the denial of earnings and also the denial of medical services, especially in public hospitals, which are already run under Russian administration. These things happen there. In the latest message from the Ukrainian Center of National Resistance, it is highlighted that occupiers also threatening to seize heavy machinery from farmers if they don't have Russian documents in the midst of the preparation for the agricultural season. The occupiers establish a fake structure of entities that will inspect farming equipment. This equipment will need separately issued documents, which are only available to Ukrainians which accepted the report. Methods are against the international law and represent Russia's attempts in illegal genocide of Ukrainians and take away their citizenship by force. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Bionade. So we will, of course, keep everyone informed about further news involving forced passportization of residents in the occupied territories. The next item, on January 22nd, there was a meeting between the new Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in which they committed to reinforcing their defense cooperation and addressing some political disputes that had recently strained the alliance between the 2 nations. Tusk's first visit to Ukraine as prime minister was pivotal for rekindling these ties, which have been strained by some economic and logistical disputes, notably protests by Polish truckers over permit-free access for Ukrainian truckers within the European Union. A significant outcome of this diplomatic engagement was the agreement to suspend the trucker protests until March 1st, which had significantly impacted Ukraine's economy by blocking key transport routes. This temporary suspension serves as a platform for further negotiations aimed at finding lasting solutions to the grievances that initiated the protests in the first place. Furthermore, the discussions encompassed a wide range of critical issues beyond the immediate trucker protests, including Ukraine's integration into the European Union, post-war reconstruction plans for Ukraine, and joint arms production. President of Ukraine highlighted discussions around a new package of defense assistance, although specifics were not disclosed. Both leaders also touched on joint arms production and increasing the scale of arms purchases for Ukraine's defense needs. This meeting coincided with Ukraine's Unity Day, and President Zelensky also utilized this occasion to announce plans for offering dual citizenship to all ethnic Ukrainians and their descendants worldwide, excluding, of course, Russia, towards uniting Ukrainians as a global community. The next item is on January 23rd. A Russian missile strike targeted Ukraine's major cities, including Kyiv and Kharkiv particularly, resulting in the death of 18 people and injuring more than 130 others. The attacks caused extensive damage to homes, infrastructure, and over 100 high-rise buildings in Kharkiv alone, with emergency services and police conducting search and rescue operations under the difficult conditions. The Ukrainian armed forces reportedly destroyed 22 out of 44 incoming missiles, with a significant number intercepted over Kyiv. These strikes are part of a larger pattern of increased missile and drone attacks by Russian forces over the past 2 months, aimed at cities and civilian infrastructure far beyond the front lines. The attacks also left a trail of destruction in Kyiv, damaging apartment buildings, medical and educational institutions, and causing injuries across several districts. In a notable development, Poland's military responded to the increased frequency and intensity of this missile strike by scrambling jets after observing this activity on their radar. Additionally, on January 27th, a Russian attack by 2 Iskander-M missiles on an industrial facility in the Kremenchuk district was conducted. Fortunately, no one was reported hurt in the incident. However, the facility is the largest petroleum product refinery in Ukraine, and the strike will likely have a significant impact on production. The fire covered an area of more than 1 square kilometer, and 150 firefighters and around 50 fire trucks took part in extinguishing the fire, including many fire trucks and helpers from neighboring regions. The next item, on January 24th, the Ukrainian Security Service reportedly executed a successful drone strike on a Rosneft oil refinery in Tuapse, Krasnodar Krai, marking a significant targeting of Russian infrastructure deep inside their territory. The attack caused a fire at the refinery, which is a crucial facility for the Russian economy and military fuel. Although the fire at the installation spread over 200 square meters, it was extinguished within 5 hours, and there were no reported casualties. This operation is part of a broader series of attacks on oil and gas processing infrastructure, aiming to undermine Russia's economy's ability to support their military efforts in occupying Ukraine. The oil refinery attacks included the one in Tuapse, as well as in Novatek and an oil depot in Bryansk, which were targeted recently. These strikes are strategic, intending to disrupt Russian fuel supplies for the military. The Tuapse refinery before the attack had undergone significant upgrades, including the construction of a crude distillation unit and a vacuum gas oil hydrocracking unit. Apparently that particular thing, this vacuum thing, was targeted specifically, which is essential for refining crude oil into more usable products. Despite the attack, the global energy market appears to be, the impact on it that was observed appears to be minimal so far, as the exports constitute a relatively small fraction of Russia's total oil output. However, the series of overall attacks do seem to be having a relatively significant impact on Russia's overall oil output, and particularly their ability to refine fuel for the military. So although it might not have a big market impact, it probably has an outsized impact on their military capabilities. The Russian authorities and media reported seeing unidentified UAVs before and after the refinery fire, indicating a well-coordinated and executed operation. The incident also resulted in temporary restrictions at the Sochi airport. Next item. On January 25th, the nation of Denmark has allocated an additional 91 million Danish kroner approximately 13.3 million US dollars, for a project specifically designated to support cybersecurity and cyber defense capabilities of Ukraine's armed forces. The aid package is provided under the auspices of the Estonian and Luxembourgish-led IT coalition for Ukraine, known as the Tallinn Initiative. On December 20th, Ukraine and 10 partner countries, which were mentioned, designed this initiative to help protect Ukraine in the digital domain. Alongside cybersecurity support, Denmark, with the Netherlands and the US, also lead a coalition providing Ukraine with F-16 fighter jets. Earlier in January, Denmark announced an additional package of 21.9 million in funding for the reconstruction of Mykolaiv, which is a city, of course, that has been significantly impacted by the invasion. Denmark also announced yesterday or today, I believe, that they have reached an agreement to commence bilateral negotiations on a document regarding security guarantees similar to the ones that the France and the UK. The UK has already signed their agreement. France is currently working on theirs. This move is part of a broader initiative following a declaration adopted at the last NATO summit in July. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Rasmussen, during his visit to Mykolaiv, emphasized Denmark's commitment to assisting Ukraine in fully restoring its territorial integrity, repelling all Russian invasion forces, and achieving full membership in the European Union. Discussions between Rasmussen and his Ukrainian counterpart Kuleba have led to an agreement to start concrete negotiations on bilateral security commitments between the two nations. They also deliberated on concrete steps Denmark can take to regain control of the territory and agreed to hold a defense industry forum to discuss cooperation on drone production specifically. That's pretty much it for that. There's just mention of like G7 framework declarations and things like that. So basically Denmark is participating very vigorously in all of the international forums that have been set up to help Ukraine, I think is kind of the general vibe we're getting from Denmark these days, which is much appreciated. Small country, but very helpful in these regards. The next item, on January 26th, Nepal's government has formally requested Russia to repatriate Nepali nationals who were recruited to fight in Ukraine. This request encompasses the return of both the recruits and the bodies of those who died in the conflict. The Russian army is estimated to have recruited more than 200 Nepali nationals for combat roles in Ukraine, with at least 15 deaths so far reported among them. This situation has prompted Nepal's foreign minister, Narayan Prakash Saud, to address the issue directly with Russian authorities, illustrating concern for the safety and human rights of Nepali citizens involved in this conflict far from Nepal. There are also reports, I should mention too that relatively recently, India stopped hiring Gurkhas from Nepal for their military. So I think a lot of those guys don't have like a lot of work. And of course, Nepal is not a super like economic powerhouse. So I think a lot of those guys wind up maybe taking work from Russian recruiters. But yeah, just an aside there. Anyways, there are also reports of the presence of mercenaries from Malaysia at Russian military training camps in the occupied areas of Donetsk. The Ukrainian National Resistance Center has identified these individuals as Malaysian, as they were accompanied by a translator, and indicates that they are actively involved alongside Russian combat forces. This development raises significant questions about the recruitment and use of foreign mercenaries in the full-scale invasion, and Ukrainian authorities have warned that anyone fighting alongside the Russians against Ukraine is considered a valid military target, emphasizing the risks involved for those participating on behalf of Russia. Cuban mercenaries are also reportedly participating in the invasion alongside Russia, with Russia offering a signing bonus considered significantly higher than the Cuban monthly salary. At least 119 Cubans have been determined to have gone to fight in Ukraine, although that figure is considered a relatively low estimate, and it's about 4 months old. The actual number of Cuban participants is likely to be higher, and it's only probably known to Russian recruiters. These mercenaries, alongside individuals from other countries like Belarus and Serbia, have been observed in Russian-occupied territories in Donetsk, and they're undergoing training by Wagner and also the Russian puppet governments to take part in combat operations. The final piece of news today, news got through the news faster than I thought this week, I suppose. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, or PACE, P-A-C-E, has formally adopted a resolution calling for its member states to recognize the deportation and forced displacement of Ukrainian children by Russian authorities as acts of genocide. This resolution is a response to disturbing findings in a Yale study, among others, regarding the treatment and displacement of Ukrainian children amid the ongoing conflict involving Russia and Ukraine. Key findings from a significant Yale University study released last year have implicated Belarus in these international crimes, revealing the deportation of at least 2,400 Ukrainian children to camps within Belarus. Again, this study was released last year, and these are confirmed deportations, meaning that the real number is likely substantially higher. The study underscores Belarus's involvement at the governmental level, with President Alexander Lukashenko directly overseeing efforts in the coordination with Russia to facilitate the deportations. The report details how occupying forces in the regions known as the Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic, of course, the puppet governments created by Russia, alongside other regime-aligned organizations from Russia and Belarus, like the FSB and the Belarusian Security Services, have orchestrated the movement of these children from occupied territories in Ukraine to Belarus. This occupation is part of a broader strategy involving the forced displacement and indoctrination of the Ukrainian population. Furthermore, the investigation has uncovered that over half the facilities where these children are being held are engaged in re-education, military training, or are conducting unknown medical activities. Such practices raise serious concerns about the intentions behind these activities and the long-term impact on children's well-being and identity. This resolution by PACE, supported by the findings of the Yale University study, bring to light the grave nature of the situation and the urgent need for international recognition of this crime against humanity and the action to address the forced displacement and indoctrination of Ukrainian children victimized by Russia's occupation. So that concludes my news report for this week. So thanks everyone very much.